The moon does not make mistakes. People do. 5 years later, Evelyn Hart would remember those words as the moment everything began. But on that cold autumn night, standing alone beneath the full moon, she felt only fear. The entire tribe of Moonridge had gathered in the central square. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering lantern light, their faces lifted toward the ancient stone platform at the heart of the village. The scent of pine drifted through the mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the dark forest. Yet even the sounds of nature seemed quieter than usual, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Evelyn stood at the base of the platform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her faded gray dress. She could feel the weight of every stare. Some were curious, others uneasy. A few already looked afraid. She lowered her eyes. She was only 22 years old, but she had spent most of her life feeling different. The strange crescent-shaped mark beneath her collarbone had appeared when she was a child. No healer could explain it. No elder could identify it. Some called it unusual. Others called it dangerous. Tonight, the tribe intended to learn the truth. Step forward, Evelyn Hart. Elder Magnus' voice echoed across the square. Evelyn forced her legs to move. The stone steps felt impossibly tall as she climbed toward the platform. With every step, the whispers grew louder. She recognized many of the voices. Neighbors, merchants, people she had greeted every week. People whose fences she had helped repair after storms. People she had quietly brought food to during harsh winters. Yet tonight none of them smiled. None of them met her eyes. The realization hurt more than she expected. At the center of the platform stood the tribal elders dressed in ceremonial robes embroidered with silver thread. Elder Magnus raised his staff toward the sky. Let the moon reveal what has long remained hidden. The crowd fell silent. The ancient symbols carved into the stone platform began to glow. Pale silver light spread outward like flowing water. Evelyn felt warmth bloom beneath her skin. Her breath caught. The mark beneath her collarbone stirred. Not painfully, almost as if it had been sleeping for years and was finally waking up. A murmur rolled through the crowd. The silver glow intensified. Moonlight poured over the platform, surrounding Evelyn in shimmering light. For one brief moment, hope flickered inside her chest. Maybe the mark was a blessing. Maybe tonight would finally end the rumors. Maybe she would no longer be the girl everyone whispered about. Then the light changed. Gasps erupted across the square. The silver glow around the mark darkened. Slowly, unnaturally, like ink spreading through clear water. Evelyn stared down in confusion. The crescent mark turned black. Not gray, not silver, black. A chill swept through the crowd. Someone stepped backward. Then another, and another. Elder Magnus' expression drained of color. Fear flashed across his face before he quickly hid it. The silence that followed felt endless. No, Evelyn whispered. Her voice barely reached her own ears. What does it mean? No one answered immediately. The elders exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, Magnus stepped forward and raised his voice for all to hear. The moon has revealed the truth. His words rolled across the square. This mark is not a blessing. Evelyn's stomach tightened. It is a sign of impurity. The crowd erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some people looked shocked. Others looked relieved, as though their suspicions had finally been confirmed. Evelyn stood frozen. Impure. The word struck her harder than the mountain wind. She searched the crowd desperately. A woman whose sick husband she had once cared for lowered her gaze. A shopkeeper she greeted every morning turned away. Even people who knew her kindness suddenly looked uncertain, as though one word had erased years of knowing her. There must be a mistake, Evelyn said. Her voice shook. I've never harmed anyone. But Magnus' face remained stern. The moon goddess has spoken. The words landed like a locked door. Around her, the crowd grew quieter, more distant, a little farther away from her with every passing second. Then a small voice suddenly broke through the silence. She helped my grandma last winter. A young boy stood near the back of the crowd, clutching his mother's hand. His confused eyes fixed on the elders. If she's impure, why is she always helping people? For a moment, nobody spoke. The question lingered in the cold night air. The boy's mother quickly pulled him closer. Several adults looked uncomfortable. Elder Magnus ignored the question entirely. Beginning tonight, he declared, Evelyn Hart shall be excluded from all tribal ceremonies until further review. A wave of murmurs swept through the square. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. Excluded, isolated, judged, not because of anything she had done, because of a mark she never asked for. She stood alone beneath the moonlight while hundreds watched in silence. Then something strange happened. The black crescent beneath her collarbone pulsed once. Just once. A faint shimmer of silver flickered at its center before disappearing. No one seemed to notice. No one except Elder Magnus. For the briefest moment, fear returned to his eyes. Real fear. Not fear of Evelyn. Fear of the mark itself. Evelyn saw it. And suddenly, for the first time that night, she wondered if the elders were not telling the whole truth. Far beyond the northern mountains, more than 200 miles away, a royal messenger rode through the darkness carrying a sealed report intended for the Alpha King. The report contained only 4 words. The mark has returned. The next morning, Moonridge looked exactly the same. The pine trees still swayed beyond the village. Merchants still opened their shops along the main road. Smoke still curled from stone chimneys into the pale autumn sky. Yet for Evelyn Hart, everything had changed. She stepped onto the front porch of the small cabin she shared with her grandmother and immediately felt it. Conversations stopped when she passed. Doors closed a little faster. Neighbors who once greeted her with polite smiles suddenly found reasons to look away. The word impure had traveled through the village before sunrise. By noon, it seemed to follow her everywhere. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and continued walking toward the market. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that kindness was not something you practiced only when life was easy. Kindness mattered most when it was difficult. Still, every step felt heavier than the last. A pair of women standing beside a produce stand lowered their voices when she approached. An older man who used to wave every morning suddenly became fascinated by arranging crates. Even the baker who had known her since childhood hesitated before handing over a loaf of bread. None of them were openly cruel. Somehow that hurt even more. By afternoon, clouds drifted across the mountains, covering the sun in a blanket of gray. Evelyn spent several hours gathering herbs near the forest edge, grateful for the quiet. The woods never judged her. The wind did not care about tribal rumors. The birds did not whisper when she walked past. Here, at least, she could breathe. She was kneeling beside a patch of wild lavender when she heard frantic shouting somewhere beyond the trees. At first she thought she imagined it. Then came another cry. Higher, younger, afraid. Evelyn stood immediately. The sound came from the direction of Silver Creek. Her heart skipped. Without thinking, she ran. Branches brushed against her sleeves as she hurried through the forest. The shouting grew louder. By the time she reached the creek, several villagers had already gathered along the bank. Panic filled the air. A small boy stood stranded on a narrow rock near the middle of the rushing water. Recent rain had swollen the creek far beyond its normal size. The current churned around him. "Stay where you are," someone shouted. "Do not move." The boy looked terrified. Tears streaked his cheeks. Evelyn recognized him instantly. It was Noah, the same child who had spoken up for her during the ceremony. Several adults stood nearby, arguing about what to do. No one seemed willing to enter the cold water. Evelyn did not hesitate. She stepped forward. The crowd noticed her immediately. Uneasy silence spread through the group. One man opened his mouth as if to object, then stopped. Evelyn ignored every stare. She focused only on the frightened child. "Noah," she called gently. "Look at me." The boy's eyes found hers. "I am scared," he whispered. "I know," Evelyn said. "But you are going to be okay." She stepped carefully into the creek. The water was freezing against her boots. The current pulled hard, but she continued moving. Slowly, carefully. Noah watched her the entire time. When she finally reached him, relief flooded his face. "I have you," she promised. And for the first time since the ceremony, someone smiled when they looked at Evelyn Hart. Noah clung to Evelyn's hand all the way back to shore. The moment his feet touched dry ground, his mother rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. Relief washed across her face so quickly that she forgot everything else. For one brief second, she looked at Evelyn with pure gratitude. Then she noticed the curious stares around them. The memory of the ceremony seemed to return all at once. Her expression changed. Not cruelly, not intentionally, just enough for Evelyn to notice. "Thank you," she said softly before guiding Noah away. The words were sincere, but they were followed by distance. Evelyn watched them disappear down the path. The familiar ache returned to her chest. Around her, the villagers slowly dispersed. No one spoke to her. No one criticized her either. It was as though they could not decide what frightened them more, the mark beneath her skin or the kindness she continued to show despite it. As evening approached, gray clouds rolled across the mountains. A cold breeze swept through Moonridge. Evelyn returned to her cabin carrying a basket of herbs gathered after the rescue. Her grandmother, Rose Hart, sat near the fireplace knitting quietly. The older woman's sharp blue eyes immediately studied her granddaughter's face. "You helped someone again," Rose said. Evelyn managed a small smile. "How did you know?" "Because you always do." Rose set the knitting aside. "And because whenever you come home after helping someone, you look disappointed." Evelyn lowered herself into a chair beside the fire. "I do not expect rewards." "No," Rose nodded. "You expect people to remember who you are." The words struck uncomfortably close to the truth. For several moments, only the crackling fire filled the room. Then Rose leaned forward. "Tell me something. When the mark changed during the ceremony, did you feel anything?" Evelyn hesitated. "Warmth. Only warmth. And something else." She glanced down at her collarbone. It felt awake. Rose's knitting needle slipped from her hand. Just for an instant. The reaction was small, but Evelyn noticed it. "Grandmother." Rose quickly recovered. "It is getting late. We should rest." But Evelyn could not shake the feeling that her grandmother knew more than she admitted. That night, rain tapped softly against the cabin windows. Sleep came slowly. Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling while questions circled endlessly through her mind. Why had Elder Magnus looked afraid? Why had the mark reacted the way it did? And why did everyone seem so certain she was cursed when nobody could explain what the mark actually was? Sometime after midnight, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. Evelyn sat upright immediately. Another knock followed. Urgent. Rose was already awake. The older woman moved to the door and opened it. Noah stood outside soaked from the rain, breathing hard. His eyes were wide with worry. "Please," he said. "You have to come." Evelyn was on her feet instantly. "What happened?" Noah swallowed. "My grandfather collapsed while working in the storage barn. The healer is away, and nobody knows what to do." His voice trembled. "Please help him." Evelyn glanced toward Rose. The older woman held her gaze for a long moment before giving a small nod. Outside, thunder rumbled across the distant mountains. Evelyn grabbed her cloak and followed Noah into the storm, unaware that before sunrise, the entire village would be talking about her again for a very different reason. Rain hammered the rooftops of Moonridge as Evelyn followed Noah through the dark village streets. Water splashed beneath her boots while distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Lanterns flickered behind shuttered windows. Most of the village was asleep, unaware that another emergency was unfolding. Noah led her toward a large storage barn near the northern edge of town. Several people stood outside despite the storm, their worried voices carrying through the rain. The moment they saw Evelyn approaching, conversation stopped. The familiar silence returned. Yet this time it felt different. Less fearful, more uncertain. Noah pushed open the barn door and hurried inside. Evelyn followed. The scent of hay filled the air. An older man sat on a wooden crate while two neighbors hovered nearby looking helpless. His face appeared pale with exhaustion. He was breathing steadily, but his hands trembled slightly. "Grandpa," Noah said, rushing to his side. The old man managed a weak smile. Relief softened his features when he saw the boy was safe. "You should be resting," one of the villagers told Evelyn. "The healer is gone until tomorrow." Evelyn knelt beside the elderly man anyway. "What happened?" she asked gently. "I was moving grain sacks," he replied. Then everything started spinning. Evelyn placed a hand against his wrist. His pulse felt fast. She remembered similar symptoms from previous winters when older villagers pushed themselves too hard during harvest season. "How much water have you had today?" she asked. The old man looked embarrassed. "Not much." Evelyn nodded slowly. She requested warm water, a blanket, and a chair closer to the fireplace. For several moments nobody moved. Then Noah's mother stepped forward first. Without a word, she fetched the blanket. Another villager brought water. A third moved the chair. Evelyn noticed the exchange, but said nothing. Together, they helped the old man settle comfortably. Within half an hour, color slowly returned to his face. His breathing steadied. The tension inside the barn began to ease. "I feel better already," he admitted. Noah grinned. His mother looked visibly relieved. Around them, several villagers exchanged glances. No miracles had happened. No mysterious powers. Just simple care. Yet the result was impossible to ignore. As the storm continued outside, more people quietly arrived. Word traveled quickly in a small town. Some came to check on Noah's grandfather. Others came to see Evelyn. She could feel their eyes on her. The same people who had avoided her only hours earlier now watched with growing confusion. An impure girl was not supposed to act like this. An impure girl was not supposed to spend her night helping others. Near midnight, the barn door opened again. Elder Magnus stepped inside. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his cloak. The room immediately grew quiet. His gaze swept across the crowd before settling on Evelyn. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Magnus looked toward the recovering old man. His expression remained unreadable. "Interesting," he said quietly. The single word sent a strange chill through Evelyn. Something about the way he said it felt wrong. Not surprised. Not pleased. Concerned. As though tonight had not unfolded the way he expected. Then his eyes briefly dropped toward the hidden mark beneath Evelyn's collarbone. And once again, she saw the same thing she had seen during the ceremony. Fear. The storm finally passed just before dawn. By sunrise, Moonridge was buzzing with quiet conversation. People gathered outside shops and along wooden walkways, repeating the same story. Evelyn Hart had spent the night helping Noah's grandfather when nobody else knew what to do. Some spoke with admiration, others with confusion. A few still looked uneasy whenever they mentioned the mark beneath her skin. But for the first time since the ceremony, doubt had entered the village. Doubt about the elders. Doubt about the word impure. Nearly 200 miles north, in the capital city of Blackthorn Keep, another conversation was taking place. Alpha King Damian Blackwood stood before a wall-sized map of the Northern Territories. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows behind him, casting long shadows across the stone floor. At 30 years old, Damian ruled more than 50 tribes scattered across mountains, forests, and valleys. He was respected not because he demanded loyalty, but because he paid attention to details others ignored. That was why the report in his hand bothered him. "Read it again," he said. His royal advisor, Marcus Hale, glanced down at the parchment. Unidentified crescent mark. Female Omega. Village of Moonridge. Publicly declared impure during a tribal ceremony. Damian remained silent. Anything else? The local elder overseeing the ceremony was Magnus Whitmore. That name caught his attention. Damian turned slightly. Magnus. Marcus nodded. The same elder who requested access to restricted royal archives 6 years ago. Damian's eyes narrowed. He remembered the request. Magnus had asked for records connected to ancient lunar symbols and bloodline markings. The request had been denied. "Continue," Damian said. Marcus unfolded a second page. Several witnesses report unusual behavior during the ceremony. The mark initially reacted to moonlight before changing appearance. The elder appeared alarmed. Damian walked toward the window overlooking the city below. Thousands of citizens moved through the streets beyond the castle walls. Yet his thoughts remained fixed on Moonridge. Something about the report felt incomplete. "And now," he asked. Marcus hesitated. A follow-up message arrived this morning. He handed over another parchment. Damian read it carefully. Local Omega identified as Evelyn Hart. Recently declared impure. Multiple reports describe her assisting villagers despite social isolation. Community sentiment beginning to shift. Damian read the final line twice. Then he folded the parchment. "Interesting." Marcus studied him carefully. "Do you believe the reports?" Damian looked toward the distant mountains beyond the city. "I believe people rarely fear what they understand." Silence settled between them. Finally, Damian reached a decision. "Prepare a travel party." Marcus blinked. "Your Majesty? I want to see Moonridge myself." "You suspect the elders made a mistake?" Damian's gaze hardened slightly. "No." He looked down at the report bearing Evelyn Hart's name. "I suspect someone is hiding the truth." Far away in Moonridge, Evelyn stood outside her cabin watching the first sunlight break through the clouds. She had no idea that a king had just changed his plans because of her. She only knew that for the first time in days, people were beginning to look at her differently. And somewhere deep beneath her collarbone, hidden beneath her clothing, the dark crescent mark pulsed softly once again. 3 days later, the people of Moonridge gathered along the main road for a reason none of them had expected. The Alpha King was coming. News of Damian Blackwood's visit spread through the village faster than wildfire. Merchants closed their shops. Families swept their porches. Even the elders appeared unusually tense. By mid-morning, the entire village seemed to be holding its breath. Evelyn tried to avoid the excitement. She spent the morning helping her grandmother organize dried herbs behind their cabin. Yet even there, she could hear distant voices and hurried footsteps. "You should go see him," Rose said suddenly. Evelyn looked up from a bundle of lavender. "Why?" Rose smiled faintly. "Because everyone else will." Evelyn shook her head. "I do not think the Alpha King came all this way to meet someone like me." The smile vanished from Rose's face. For a brief moment, something unreadable passed through her eyes. "Perhaps not," she said quietly. "Or perhaps that is exactly why he came." Before Evelyn could ask what she meant, a horn sounded from the center of town. The Alpha King had arrived. In the village square, Damian Blackwood stood beside his advisors while Elder Magnus welcomed him with practiced politeness. The king's dark coat moved gently in the autumn breeze. His presence seemed to change the atmosphere around him. Conversations quieted. People straightened their posture. Even the elders chose their words carefully. Damian listened to Magnus speak about Moonridge's history, harvests, and traditions. Yet his attention remained elsewhere. He was watching the people, watching how they reacted, watching what they avoided saying. "You have an unusual situation in your village," Damian said eventually. Magnus' smile tightened. "I assume your majesty refers to the Impure Omega." Damian noticed the speed of the answer, almost as if the elder had been waiting for the subject. "I refer to Evelyn Hart." Magnus lowered his gaze respectfully. "A regrettable matter." Damian studied him for several seconds. "Regrettable because she is dangerous?" The elder hesitated. "The mark suggests uncertainty." "Interesting," Damian replied. "Because every report I received described generosity rather than danger." For the first time, Magnus seemed uncomfortable. The conversation ended soon after. But Damian's suspicion deepened. By late afternoon, he decided to walk through the village without ceremony. No guards surrounding him. No formal announcements. Just observation. He passed families repairing fences. Children playing near the creek. Farmers unloading supplies. Everywhere he went, one name surfaced repeatedly. Evelyn Hart. Not spoken with fear. Spoken with confusion. "She helped my grandfather. She brought food when my wife was sick. She repaired our roof after the winter storm." None of it matched the image Magnus had presented. Then Damian saw her. She was standing near a small garden behind a weathered cabin, carefully gathering herbs into a basket. Nothing about the scene appeared remarkable, yet she immediately stood out. Not because of beauty, not because of the mark hidden beneath her clothing, because she seemed completely unaware that anyone might be watching. There was no performance, no attempt to gain approval, just quiet purpose. Damian stopped several yards away. Evelyn sensed someone nearby and looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. Neither spoke. For a brief moment, the sounds of the village seemed to fade into the background. Damian expected fear. Most people reacted that way when facing a king. Instead, he saw surprise. Then calm curiosity. Nothing more. Evelyn quickly lowered her gaze and returned to her work. The encounter lasted only seconds. Yet as Damian continued walking, one thought refused to leave him. Every person in Moonridge seemed determined to define Evelyn Hart by a mark. But the woman he had just seen looked nothing like the story he had been told. The following morning, Damian requested access to Moonridge's historical records. The request seemed simple. The reaction was not. Elder Magnus agreed almost immediately, yet something in his expression suggested reluctance rather than cooperation. By midday, Damian sat inside the village archive, a stone building tucked behind the ceremonial grounds. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight as old ledgers and handwritten records were stacked across a long wooden table. Marcus stood nearby reviewing documents while Damian carefully examined reports, dating back more than 20 years. Most contained ordinary information about harvests, births, and seasonal ceremonies. Then he noticed a gap. 3 entire years of records were missing. Damian looked up. "Where are the archives from 22 years ago?" Magnus remained perfectly still. Some documents were damaged during a winter flood. Damian held his gaze. "All of them?" The elder hesitated. "Only briefly." "Unfortunately, yes." Damian said nothing. But the answer only deepened his suspicion. Later that afternoon, He left the archive and walked through the village alone. The farther he moved from the center of town, the more honest people became. An elderly shopkeeper quietly admitted she had never feared Evelyn. A farmer revealed that Evelyn had spent weeks helping repair homes after a severe storm. Another villager confessed that most people had accepted the elder's judgment simply because questioning it felt impossible. Piece by piece, the story Magnus had built began to crack. As sunset approached, Damien found himself standing outside the Hart family cabin. He had not planned to stop there. Yet something told him he needed answers that could not be found inside an archive. Rose Hart opened the door before he knocked. The older woman looked neither surprised nor intimidated. "Your Majesty," she said calmly. "I wondered how long it would take." Damien studied her carefully. "You knew I would come. You are asking the right questions." Rose stepped aside. Most people do not. Inside, Evelyn was sorting dried herbs at a wooden table. She froze when she saw the Alpha King enter her home. Standing so close to him felt different than seeing him across the village. His presence filled the room without effort. Yet there was no arrogance in him, only focus. "I apologize for the intrusion," Damien said. Evelyn quickly shook her head. "You do not need to apologize, Your Majesty." Rose motioned toward a chair. "Sit. We have wasted enough years already." Damien immediately noticed the choice of words. Years. Not days. Not weeks. Years. The room fell quiet. Finally, Rose opened an old cedar chest tucked beneath a window. From inside, she removed a weathered leather journal wrapped in cloth. Her hands trembled slightly. This belonged to Evelyn's mother. Evelyn stared at her grandmother in shock. "You told me it was lost." "I lied," Rose whispered. Pain flickered across her face. "Because I was afraid." Damien accepted the journal carefully. The cover was faded with age, but one symbol remained clearly visible. A silver crescent surrounded by intricate markings. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. He had seen that symbol before. Not in Moonridge. Not in village records. In the restricted royal archives. Suddenly, 20 years of missing history no longer looked like an accident. Damien spent most of the night reading the journal. By sunrise, he had reached the final page. The room remained silent except for the crackling fireplace and the occasional turning of paper. Across from him, Rose Hart sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. Evelyn had barely slept. Every answer seemed to create 3 more questions. Finally, Damien closed the journal and looked up. The expression on his face had changed. The uncertainty was gone. In its place stood conviction. "Your mother was never cursed," he said. Evelyn felt her breath catch. Rose lowered her eyes. "I know," Damien continued, "because the symbol described in these pages appears in royal records older than any document in Moonridge." Evelyn stared at him. "Then what is it?" For a moment, Damien said nothing. "It is a lunar bloodline mark." The room fell completely still. A mark granted only to families chosen by the moon goddess generations ago. Evelyn struggled to process the words. "Then why was I declared impure?" Rose closed her eyes. The pain she had carried for decades finally surfaced. "Because your mother frightened them." Evelyn slowly turned toward her grandmother. Rose's voice trembled. "When your mother was young, the mark appeared exactly as it appeared on you. Elder Magnus' predecessor believed it signaled the return of an ancient bloodline. Some celebrated. Others feared losing power." Damien opened the journal again and pointed to several passages. "Your mother wrote about arguments among the elders. She wrote about warnings. She believed certain records were being hidden." Rose nodded. "Then she died unexpectedly from illness a few years later. After that, people stopped asking questions." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "And Magnus?" Damien's gaze hardened. "Magnus inherited the secret." By midday, Damien ordered a public assembly. The announcement spread across Moonridge within hours. Villagers filled the square beneath a bright autumn sky. Merchants closed their stalls. Families gathered along the edges of the crowd. No one knew exactly why the Alpha King had called the meeting, but everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Elder Magnus stood near the ceremonial platform, wearing his usual expression of calm authority. Yet Damien noticed the tension in his shoulders. Evelyn remained near the front beside Rose. Hundreds of eyes followed her movements. Some looked curious. Others looked ashamed. Damien stepped onto the platform and silence swept across the square. "For several days," he began, I have investigated the circumstances surrounding Evelyn Hart's designation. A murmur passed through the crowd. Magnus remained motionless. Damien continued. I reviewed local records. I spoke with villagers. I examined evidence hidden for more than 20 years. The silence deepened. Then Damien held up the journal. This belonged to Evelyn's mother. For the first time, Magnus visibly reacted. Only slightly, but enough. Damien saw it. So did many others. The journal contains testimony, observations, and descriptions that directly contradict the claim that Evelyn's mark represents impurity. Whispers erupted across the square. Magnus stepped forward. Your Majesty, ancient writings are open to interpretation. Damien looked directly at him. Missing archives are not. The crowd instantly fell silent again. Magnus' expression tightened. Damien's voice remained calm. 3 years of records disappeared. Requests were made for restricted royal information. Key documents vanished after Evelyn's mother's death. None of these events were accidents. A woman near the back gasped softly. Several villagers exchanged uneasy looks. Damien turned toward the people. Many of you know Evelyn Hart. Personally. Heads slowly nodded throughout the crowd. How many times has she helped this village? No one answered immediately. Then an older farmer raised his hand. She repaired our roof after the storm. Another voice followed. She brought food when my husband was sick. She helped my grandfather. Noah's voice carried clearly through the square. More voices joined. One after another. Story after story. The crowd that had once stood silently during her condemnation now spoke in her defense. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. Damien waited until the voices faded. Then he looked back toward Magnus. You called her dangerous. His voice echoed across the square. The evidence says otherwise. Magnus lowered his gaze. For the first time, he seemed smaller, older, tired. I did what I believed protected the tribe, he said quietly. Damien nodded once. Perhaps, but fear is not truth. The words settled over the crowd. Heavy, unavoidable. Then Damien turned toward Evelyn. Every eye followed him. Evelyn Hart. Her heart pounded. You were judged for a mark no one understood. The village remained completely silent. You were isolated because of fear. Evelyn swallowed hard. Damien descended the platform and stopped beside her. Not above her. Beside her. But nothing I have discovered supports the claim that you are impure. A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. Some people lowered their heads. Others stared in disbelief. Damien faced the entire village. His voice carried across every corner of the square. The accusation against Evelyn Hart is hereby withdrawn. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Noah began clapping. One pair of hands became 2, then 10, then 50. The sound spread through Moonridge until the entire square echoed with applause. And standing beside Evelyn while the village finally saw her for who she truly was, Damien realized there was still one final truth left to uncover. Because the mark was not merely innocent. It was important. The applause continued long after Damien's announcement ended. For the first time in years, Evelyn Hart stood in the center of Moonridge without feeling the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Yet even as the crowd celebrated, Damien knew one final piece of the truth remained hidden. He raised his hand, and the square gradually fell silent again. There is one more matter, he said. The villagers exchanged curious glances. Damien opened the journal once more and turned to the final pages. The mark carried by Evelyn Hart was never a warning. He looked toward her. It was a promise. The crowd listened carefully. Generations ago, a small number of families were entrusted with preserving the oldest traditions of the moon goddess. Their descendants carried a rare lunar mark. Over time, those bloodlines became scattered, records disappeared, and knowledge was lost. Or hidden. Several eyes turned toward Magnus. The elder lowered his gaze. Damien continued. The mark appears dark before it fully awakens. That detail was recorded in royal archives centuries ago. Evelyn was condemned because people recognized part of the truth and ignored the rest. A stunned silence settled across the square. Evelyn touched the spot beneath her collarbone without realizing it. All her life, she had believed something was wrong with her. Now she was learning that the very thing that isolated her was also part of her family's history. Rose wiped tears from her eyes. Your mother always hoped this day would come, she whispered. Damien then turned toward Magnus. The former confidence that once surrounded the elder had vanished. Magnus Whitmore, Damien said calmly. You concealed records, allowed misinformation to spread, and failed to correct a false accusation. No one spoke. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as elder until a full review is completed by the Royal Council. Magnus closed his eyes briefly before nodding. There was no argument, no protest, only quiet acceptance. Perhaps, for the first time in many years, he understood the consequences of choosing fear over truth. As he stepped away from the platform, the village watched in silence. Then something unexpected happened. A woman approached Evelyn. It was the baker who had hesitated to serve her days earlier. I owe you an apology, she said softly. Another villager stepped forward. Then another. An older farmer removed his cap. Noah's mother wiped away tears. No grand speeches followed. Just honest words from people who finally understood how wrong they had been. Evelyn listened, overwhelmed. She had imagined this moment countless times. Yet now that it was happening, she felt no desire for revenge. Only relief. The burden she had carried for years seemed lighter with every passing minute. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Damien remained beside her. The afternoon sun painted the mountains gold while a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the square. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn finally looked at him. Thank you, she said quietly. Damien shook his head. You do not owe me thanks for telling the truth. Evelyn smiled faintly. Most people never bothered looking for it. Damien looked at her for a moment. When I arrived in Moonridge, everyone wanted me to see your mark. Evelyn lowered her eyes. I am used to that. The strange thing is, Damien said, the more I learned about you, the less important the mark became. Evelyn looked back at him. Why? For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on the Alpha King's face. Because while everyone else was looking for flaws, I kept finding reasons to respect you. His gaze never left hers. They spent years judging a symbol. I spent a few days learning who you are. Evelyn felt her heart tighten. Not with fear, with something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. And what did you find? She asked softly. Damien's answer came without hesitation. I found someone who continued helping others even when they turned away from her. I found someone who chose kindness over bitterness. He paused. And if you ask me, Evelyn Hart, you are exactly who you were meant to be. Emotion caught in her throat. Damien's voice softened. You are remarkable. You always were. For a second, Evelyn could not answer. Not because she did not know what to say. Because nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Not the elders. Not the villagers. Not even herself. Several months later, Moonridge looked different. Children played freely outside the Hart cabin. Merchants greeted Evelyn by name. The village had begun restoring records lost decades earlier. A new council of elders worked alongside royal historians to preserve the truth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Evelyn stood overlooking the valley beside Damien. The dark crescent beneath her collarbone now shimmered with a faint silver glow whenever moonlight touched it. Not a curse, not a sign of impurity, a reminder of where she came from. Below them, lights flickered across the village. Home. Damien stood beside her as the first stars appeared above the mountains. For years, Evelyn had searched for a place where she belonged. She finally understood that what she had truly been searching for was the truth. The mark had never been her curse. Fear had been. Fear had stolen years of her life. Fear had turned neighbors into strangers. Fear had hidden the truth. But fear could not survive forever. Not when truth finally stepped into the light. Evelyn looked across the village she once believed would never accept her. Tonight, the same people smiled when they saw her. Tonight, she was no longer the girl standing alone beneath judgment. She was finally seen. She was finally valued. She was finally home.